the book of Acts chapter 27 and verse 38. We're going to finish off the chapter tonight. I wanted to share this with you. Next Sunday night, we're going to notice in Acts chapter 28 and in the first part of that chapter that the Apostle Paul gets bitten with a viper and nothing happens to him. And I thought that probably what I might try to do next Sunday, I was talking to Mike back there about it, I think we might bring an illustration next Sunday. You know, what's wrong, Lincoln? Come on now, don't be dumping out on me real quick like here. Now you believe the Bible, right?
We're a little concerned about what the illustration is going to be.
Well, it's the real McCoy, trust me. You all believe the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. What does Matthew 16:18 tell you? Come on, Joe, read it for me, please. Read Matthew 16:18. We'll see if everybody, I don't know, maybe everybody doesn't believe the Bible in here. Matthew 16:18.
And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will...
You're in the wrong place. You're in the wrong place.
You said 16:18.
I did, didn't I? It's 18:16. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I messed up.
18:16.
It's the last chapter in the book of Mark.
Mark.
Luke, Mark. No, it's in Mark. I'm sorry. I'm messing up big time, aren't I?
Yes, you are.
That's what I do for getting in trouble. I get in trouble for trying this kind of stuff, but we're going to do it anyway. Go ahead and read that for me, please, Joseph.
Thou shalt take up serpents, and if thou drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover.
Does it mean what it says?
But it doesn't say play around and show off with it. Right.
Did I say I was going to play around and show off? I said I was going to bring an illustration, didn't I? What's wrong, Lincoln? You're not saying anything. You're too quiet. Nah, we won't bring any snakes in here.
Oh, thank goodness.
All right.
I was going to say, I guess the illustration is going to be a drawing. Illustration.
Yeah, on paper will be fine.
All right, turn to
Yes.
Matthew chapter 27, please.
Matthew or Acts?
Acts. I'll get it right in a minute or two. Hang in there.
That's what you get
I know.
for saying you're bringing snakes.
I know. I get all excited.
You like it that good?
Oh, I love them. Verse 38, just like Lincoln, I love them. Verse 38. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosed the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And falling into a place where the two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forward part stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. And the rest, some on boards, some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. Let's pray. Father, help us tonight to see in this message, in this lesson that we're about to preach, that, Lord, you're our protector and our deliverer. Lord, help us when the days come. Maybe we're about to have surgery or some other thing that would make us feel a little uneasy, maybe even fearful. That we realize that because we belong to you, our life is in your hands. Lord, it would probably surprise us the number of people down through the years that you have delivered safe and sound. We only have to read the scriptures to see many of those cases. Father, help us today to be a people who trust you. May our testimony of trust in you be so great that the lost around us realize that we have something they don't have and desire, Father, to have you. Fill me afresh with the words of this message, the Spirit. Help me to be the preacher, teacher that I need to be. Above all else, Father, I pray that you would get the glory. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. I looked at this message tonight, and a lot of it has to do simply with explaining what was going on while the Apostle Paul and all these 276 people were on this ship. And my desire was, Lord, what kind of a message can I share with the people from this? Because doesn't the Bible say the scriptures were written for our admonition? Doesn't it say that? And you know, every verse in the Bible is inspired, is it not? And so there's something in here for us tonight, and I think what I'm going to provide for you, in my opinion, is what God would have us to have tonight. So tonight we want to see in our message that when the storm appeared to be over for most, it was not for Paul as the soldiers counseled to kill him, fearing that he would escape as they left the ship. We will note that the centurion, in whose custody Paul really was, kept them from that purpose. Once again, we see that Paul is immortal. Now, I've told you about this. I've talked to you about it before. Is immortal in the sense that God will not let anything happen to him while he is in the will of God, doing the will of God. Remember, we pointed out last time in Acts 23:11 that the Lord stood by him and told him that he must bear witness in Rome. Let me just say this to you. What God tends to do, God does. What God says he's going to do, God does. And even though the circumstances around what's about to be done, those circumstances seem to be a hindrance, they're not a hindrance to God. God never forgets what he promises, neither should we. Paul's witness at Rome was as important as his witness any place else. And so this is a one-point outline, as it always is on a Sunday night. And the first point and only point is this. They discovered an inlet from the sea, which was evidently navigable. Here they were on that ship in a storm that was about to destroy everything in its path. We told you before, this is a type of hurricane. Here was a ship that had been so driven and tossed by the wind that anything visible to the navigators was unknown to them. Notice in verse 39 these words. It says, knew not the land. Knew not the land. Didn't know where they were. You ever been in a place where you didn't know where you were? I have. I've been lost a few times in the woods. One time the game warden had to come get me out. That's pretty serious, isn't it? But watch this. The only thing they saw was a certain creek with a shore, and they were minded, if possible, to thrust the ship up into that inlet. Would be the only way that they could be safe. They had all eaten as Paul encouraged them to do. That's verse 38. Now they realize that to stay alive on the ship, eventually off, that they needed to cast the wheat into the sea. They needed to lighten the ship. Look please at verse 38. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. Now, why is it important for Luke to note this as he penned down the book of Acts? Well, first of all, we need to note that all the way back in verse 18, they had cast out all the non-essentials. They didn't cast out the wheat. Now, as a final endeavor, in order to live, they cast out the wheat. Now, why was the wheat on there? Well, there's a good question or a good answer for that. This was an Egyptian ship sailing to Italy, where Rome is, with a cargo of grain. They spared the wheat, hoping to land safely, but now that wasn't possible. The wheat was a money-making merchandise intended to be delivered to Rome. Beloved, material things lose their value when death knocks at the door. Did you know that? Material things lose their value. That wheat was probably worth a great amount of money. That is a lesson sometimes taught under circumstances, under rigorous circumstances. When a house burns down. You ever watch somebody weep as their house burns down? You ever listen to them? Man, I had a lot of memories in that house. All of my pictures. All of those things that sometimes in terms of money they're not worth a lot, but in terms of what they mean to the individual, they are worth a great deal. Or how about a car being wrecked? I once heard, by way of the person that was rebuked, the lady had a car wreck, destroyed the car, her husband come and reamed her out. She destroyed a perfectly good car. Wow. That's pretty sad, isn't it, Joe? Watch this. What does the Bible tell us? Listen, look please at 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15. 1 John 2 and verse 15.
Yeah.
Love not the world, neither things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Loving the world means loving the world system. But he doesn't talk about just not loving the world system. He says, don't love the things that are in the world. How many of you tonight have a lot of things? Oh, yeah. Sometimes I wonder how honest we are with God about this verse. Do you ever think that? Things that are in the world that become so important. So important that we're willing to spend a fortune to have them. Maybe spend another fortune to protect, hold on to them. Things. Watch this. Our business ought to be laying up treasures in heaven, not on earth. Look at Matthew 6 and verse 19. Matthew 6 and verse 19. This is Jesus speaking. And it has to do with money. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. In the case of the wheat, it wasn't moths, was it? It was a hurricane, water, turbulent situation, in which more than likely thousands of dollars was cast over the side. Beloved, our values are to be in heaven, are they not? They then take up the anchors, loose the rudder, hoist the sails, and run the ship aground. Verses 40 through 41 of Acts chapter 27. Now listen very carefully. The rudders in those days would have been different than the ones that we have today. Today, most all rudders, even on some of these smaller boats, are turned by steering wheel, more or less. But in those days, it was a big old long wooden arm. Pretty primitive. The rudders are tied up here because of the wind beating upon them and would be slamming that rudder back and forth and consequently causing the ship to go from one direction to the other. And so they were tied up for a while, but now they loosen them. Notice, if you will, the front of the ship is stuck fast to ground, while the aft part is being torn up. Verse 41 of Acts chapter 27. And falling into the place, verse 41, falling into the place where the two seas met, the ship, they ran the ship aground. The idea here appears to be on purpose. But watch this. And the forward part stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. When I was in the Navy, a ship, the forward part was forward and the latter part was aft. Forward and aft, starboard, or forgot the other one, been out too long. But watch this. With all that happening so quickly, the soldiers take counsel to kill all the prisoners. Look at verse 42. Verse 42. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. Let's talk about that for a moment. Let me just say right now that Rome was very cruel, and they were cruel toward their soldiers. This was a critical moment for all the prisoners. The fact that the plural word prisoners is used here tells us that there was more than just the Apostle Paul, a prisoner on that ship. The Roman soldiers knew that if a prisoner got away from him or them, then he or they would be killed. We've already been told that. Turn back to Acts chapter 16, please, and verse 27. We'll look there at that one verse first, and then we're going to look at another one. But in Acts chapter 16 and in verse 27, we see this. And the keeper of the prison, awaking out of his sleep, seeing the prison doors open, he drew out his sword and would have killed himself, supposing that the prisoners had been fled. You remember the Apostle Paul cried out, "We're all here." But you have this situation where God delivered Paul and Silas. You remember this is a place where they sang at midnight. Here they were, beaten with a cat of nine tails, cast into the innermost prison. I've told you before, the innermost prison was a horrible place because they didn't have the bathrooms like you and I are used to today. It's unimaginable what they must have had to face just to be down there. But watch the example of this Philippian jailer. He was about to kill himself when Paul cried out to him. Instead of waiting to face humiliation and a painful execution, he would have killed himself. Roman government was cruel. Please look at Acts chapter 12 and verse 19. Acts 12 and verse 19. And when Herod had sought for him and found him not, he examined the keepers and commanded that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea and there abode. Now, who is it he sought for here? It's Peter. God delivered Peter. Remember, he planned on, after the Passover, he planned on executing Peter. But it didn't happen. And so, what happens? Roman rule. What's Roman rule? You lose your prisoner, you lose your life. That's just the way it works. And so, coming back to this situation here in Acts chapter 27, we see that these soldiers aboard that ship saw the same fate that those men there and those keepers of the prison in Acts 12:19 had. If those prisoners escaped, the soldiers paid for that with their life. Now watch this. The Apostle Paul is spared. I find this an interesting place to consider tonight for a message for each of us. But you'll notice, if you will, in verse 43. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. You mean everybody couldn't swim? Apparently not. Did you know that when I went into the Navy I couldn't swim? Did I ever tell you that? I never told you that. Well, you know, you get in a big old line. There were 100, my group started out with about 175 people. We only finished with 150. 23 went over the hill the first night and got kicked out. But we were there, 2 weeks, maybe 3. And then they said, well, everybody has to pass the swimming test. I thought, oh my. So when they went by, they asked you, can you swim? You know, I told them, sure. That was the dumbest thing I could ever say. So we got in line. I was back there about the 100th person. And, you know, the line was so long, you couldn't really see what was happening until you got there. So I got up to the place, and you're standing up on this tall ramp that's about 10 foot above the swimming pool, and you're looking at 10 foot of water. And I said, I lied. And they said, nope, toss me in. Well, I went down. Man, I was gurgling water. You would not believe. And somebody grabbed a pole and pulled me up. And they said, you're going to have to take swimming lessons. I said, okay. I thought to myself, man, I'm not spending long doing that. And just get this taken care of real quick like. So I went one day, maybe two, and I said, I'm ready. And I went up again. And this time nobody threw me in because I knew I was going to get thrown in anyway if I didn't jump in. So I jumped in. I swam this Olympic swimming pool, half of it, that's what I had to do. On my back. I went down 5 times, I come up 5 times. And I made it all the way around to the top. They hollered out, can we help you? I said, no, don't help me. When I got out of the pool, I won't tell you the exact language that they used, but they said, you're a stubborn such and such, aren't you? I said, yep. I'm not hanging out here for anybody. A little bit later on, I had to do the one with your dungarees. You know, that's your blue jeans. You know how that works? You tie your pant legs in a knot.
You take them off first.
Yeah, okay, dear. You got to get a word in edgewise no matter what, don't you? So you tie a knot in them and you hold them over. Make sure you soak them with water. Mm-hmm. And then you jump in and you pull them up underneath you. And they become a life preserver. I did it. I did it. I wasn't going to fail on that one at all. Eventually I learned to swim, but I didn't learn it in the Navy. But watch this, because I need for you to see this. The Apostle Paul is spared. Once again, we see the protective hand of God. Verse 43, but the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept him from their purpose. We see in this passage a peril rather than a persecution. Serving the Lord does not make us immune to perils of any kind. Most missionaries are aware of that. Been a number of years ago now, but I knew the fellow in a kind of basic way, didn't know him in a real personal way. But a missionary on the foreign field, and it was determined when he went over there that whatever he did, he was going to be just like the natives that he served. Well, one of the things that the natives did was to take their bath in a river. And not necessarily a very fast-moving river. And at some point, he got some kind of amoeba worm in his system, for which he came back. He had to go up and be in Alaska, that really cold climate, in order for that worm to die. That's a peril, isn't it? Would you like to have that happen to you? Had he not done what he was told to do, he died. Now watch this. Here the Apostle Paul now faced being put to death by some soldiers that were somewhat sure he would try to escape. They obviously had no idea that Paul wanted to go to Rome to witness. But all were allowed to swim to shore. That could swim, verse 43. The question has been asked by some. Was the centurion of the different disposition from the usual Roman soldiers? That would assume, or appear to be true. Or did he recognize in this apostle something closely akin to the mystic? Remember now, he's not a believer. God is not his God. In many of those religions, mystics was a part of it. So he did not believe in Paul's God, but it appears that he undoubtedly believed in Paul's wisdom. Well, what do you mean? Well, if you go back to when they were about to sail, Paul warned them. Do you remember? This thing may take lives and the ship. That's what they were told. He said God had spoken to him. Well, the centurion went to the captain. The captain, I guess, I don't know, maybe was proud. I don't know. But he was under the, we're okay. We'll make it. It's obvious that he trusted Paul because on the next day, after they began sailing from Caesarea, he had allowed Paul to go ashore at Sidon and refresh himself and visit with friends. Look at Acts 27 verse 3. Acts 27 verse 3. The next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. I believe there's something more here, however, to consider. One consideration might be Proverbs 16:7. Would you look at Proverbs 16:7? One consideration might be Proverbs 16:7. You notice I use the word might. It's up to you. You can think for yourself. I do hope you do think, rather than just simply reading through and getting nothing out of it. But notice in verse 7, when a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. Isn't that a neat verse? You say, well, do they please other people? That's not what it says. It says, please the Lord. Do your ways please the Lord tonight? However, it might be something else. Please look at Psalm 121. I think that's your favorite psalm, isn't it, Alice?
One of, yes.
Look at Psalm 121, please. I'll show you something here that's just awesome as far as I'm concerned. Psalm 121. I want to read it to you, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. The psalmist says, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. And so we see in this psalm that God promises to help all who are His. In fact, if you will, God promises to help all who ask for it. Turn to Hebrews chapter 4 and hold your hand here in Psalm 121. But look at Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 16. I see this verse as a very, very valuable verse for all Christians. Hebrews 4 verse 16. Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. I don't know about you, but for me, this grace and mercy is a needed thing every day. My day always starts out with me talking to God about this. First thing I do is thank Him for it. I think sometimes of all the grace and mercy God showed me, I don't think I could count it. But we're told in this verse to come boldly. You know, if you're walking with the Lord and you're right with Him, you got no problem with coming boldly to the throne of God's mercy and grace and finding help. There's nothing too big for God. There's nothing in your life that His grace and mercy won't control or handle. Someone has said concerning Psalm 121, it's referred to by some as a pilgrim hymn. A pilgrim hymn. You and I are pilgrims down here, aren't we? Yeah. We're just traveling through. Like Psalm 120, it affirms that all true help comes from the Lord, who is the keeper of Israel. So when the help came from Julius, the centurion, it actually came from who? From God. God stuck Julius in Paul's life for a reason. He sees his help, the psalmist in Psalm 121, sees his help coming from the Creator. Watch this. Anyone who could speak into creation, either heaven or earth, it's a small thing for him to help that Christian. I'm a firm believer, and I don't know how you think, I'm a firm believer that all God has to do is speak it and it's done. When Mary and her sister's brother was in the cave dead, in the grave dead, remember? Jesus said, Lazarus, come forth. He didn't go in there and touch him. Take some dirt and spit, anoint him with it. No, he just spoke it. Anyone that can speak into creation, the heaven and the earth, and all that's a part of it, it's a small thing for him to deliver us. When he says, verses 3 and 4 of Psalm 121, that the Creator will not suffer his foot to be moved so as to trip or fall down. That the Creator does not slumber momentarily or sleep so soundly and lengthy. He is doing what? He's reminding the listener that the Creator is always alert. Now, you and I can't always say that, can we? Can we? In fact, sometimes these days I feel less alert than I used to feel. And sometimes things sort of slip up on me. I'm not ready for it to happen, so to speak. God is alert to his people and their every predicament. The Lord is his keeper. That's what Psalm 121 says. That's one who stands guard and keeps us safe. I'm a firm believer that God has angels that watch over us. I used to say my father-in-law had several. Some of the silly things that he did and come out of it. I learned not to laugh. One time I laughed. He didn't think too much of that. I just seen God protect him so many times I thought to myself, here we go again. And this was a situation where this big old tree, this thing probably 3 foot in diameter, and God had given it to us. And when we got there, I looked at it, and the thing was crystallized, and I said to Pop, I said, we don't need that tree. I saw that tree not being a good thing. And his words to me was, never look a gift horse in the mouth. Yeah, well, anyway. When he laid that chainsaw to the side of that tree and that thing started raining limbs down right and left, looked like storm. And not one of them touched him. And I said to myself, well, that's when I started laughing. I just couldn't contain myself. Only time I ever know that he looked at me with like he was a little mad at me. Like, what's wrong with you, man? You laughing at me like this. You know what? I'm a firm believer that God protects. He says he is a shade, a protection from all adversaries of both day and night. That's the idea there. You know, we usually don't worry too much about the day because our eyes are open, but sometimes we think about the night when we close our eyes, don't we? You know what I do every night before I go to sleep? Lord, this needs your protection tonight for Alice and I. Please look over us. I don't have to go to lengthy prayer, just ask that. That's as simple as it gets. His presence, he preserves from all evil and preserves the soul, the psalmist says in 121. Whether going in or going out, the believer is never to live in fear of the elements around him. That protection is not a casual thing, but a forever thing. God is the deliverer. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 22. I want to talk about David for just a little bit, not long, but look at 2 Samuel chapter 22. I want to look at verses 1 and 2. 2 Samuel chapter 22, verses 1 and 2. And David spake unto the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord had delivered him out of the hand of all of his enemies and out of the hand of Saul. And he said, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. If you were to look at the verses before, verses 15 through 22, an account is given of several different fights that took place, some between some of his own men who were valiant soldiers of him. One of them has to do with Goliath's family, who produced a lot of giants. And having seen all of that took place, David records those words there in verses 1 and 2. When faced with Goliath himself, look at David's words. 1 Samuel 17, 32 to 37. 1 Samuel 17, 32 through 37. Remember, Saul tried to put his armor on David. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him." Talking about Goliath. "Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Thou art not able to go up against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." And David said unto Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him." I don't know too many of us that would want to take a lion by the beard, do you? You don't even want to take snakes. Why would you want to take a whole lion? "Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he had defied the armies of the living God." David said, moreover, here we go, "The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said unto David, "Go, and the Lord be with thee." David rehearsed that very idea of God being a deliverer in several Psalms. I'm only going to read one of them, and that's Psalm 18:2. But I want to tell you why I believe something here real important. Psalm 18:2. And in verse 2 we read this. "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler and the horn of my salvation, and my high tower." Look at me just a minute. You know, certain truths that the Bible teaches ought not ever be forgotten. One of the, I think, most difficult things that takes place in the life of a Christian, sometimes we forget. Singing is a great way to memorize something. Did you discover that? Have you ever discovered that? You know, sometimes when I get up Monday morning and start out the day, I remember a song we sang here Sunday night. It's not any one of the any particular one, it just is one of them. Why is that? It sticks with you. Singing sticks with you. What's a good message to stick with us, beloved? It's the idea that God was my deliverer. I don't have to live in fear every day of what's going to happen. I got enough sense to know I'm going to die one of these days. It's appointed unto men once to die. Isn't that what the Bible says? But it'll be His timing, not mine. And nobody else's. I trust Him. I don't trust people. In fact, there's been a time or two when I've said to somebody that I rode with, "Pull over and let me out." No. You ever drive like that again? Pull over and let me out. I'm not riding with you. I'm not foolish. We're not to be foolish about that kind of stuff. But the thing of it is, we have someone who looks out for us. That truth that God is our deliverer should never be forgotten. I have a question for you. What will it be like the next time they wheel you down for surgery? You ever been wheeled down for surgery? What will you begin to think about? Or will you say to the doctor or to the nurse, I have perfect peace. My God's in charge of all. Let's bow in prayer. Bow our heads in prayer.